Welcome to the channel. For this video, we are going over some of the sources of information that you can access whenever you are thinking about which deck to use for a specific event. For example, today we will start to have the metagame challenge on Magic Arena. And that is a great opportunity for you to win a lot of packs. But of course, you need to be able to bring your A game because other people will also be joining that event and everyone will be intent on winning packs. So you should make the best effort to choose or build the deck that you feel will bring you the best results. All right. So the first source of information that we have here is winning deck lists in Magic the Gathering online. So these are MTGO publicly releases lists of decks that went 5-0 in their constructed leagues. That is, you win all 5 of the 5 matches in the league. In addition, they also publish decks that perform well during big tournaments like format challenges, super qualifiers, and so on. So these lists, the lists that you see here, are actually extracted by other websites as well, such as MTG Goldfish, and we're going to see more of that in a while. But right now, let me just show you. So these are the lists that were published last July 15, 2021. And you can see like this is a mono red. You can download these or copy it in Magic for Magic Arena if you want to. And so you can see many other lists here of these different decks that did well last July 15 or based on data from published last July 15. So what are the pros and cons of this list? So each Magic the Gathering online league costs $10 to enter or 100 play points. And the format challenges cost even more. They cost $30 or 300 play points. And other events require points accumulated from finishing well in these leagues in order for you to be able to join them. Thus, the main advantage of this source of information is that it's top-notch when it comes to player quality. Like, so these decks are here and they were able to do very well. And people who play these events regularly put their own money on the line in order to play and win. Because every loss in these matches, for example, in these leagues, every loss hurts you. Uh, if you finish 5-0, then you get a lot of prizes. If you finish 3-2, you break even. If you finish worse than 3-2, then you lose money. So that speaks a lot about the effort and skill that goes into these lists. Now let's go to the disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage of this source of information is that these 5-0 lists in leagues that are released now are curated. That is, it used to be that Wizards would release all the decks that went 5-0. However, this has not been the case for quite some time now, so what they do is that they have all of these lists that went 5-0, but they only choose a few of them to release to the public. They say, they try to make sure to provide representation to all the decks that make 5-0, but they don't release all of them so that you won't actually know if there's a deck that's clearly dominating above all the others. You won't be able to see that just by looking at this list. Another source of, or another limitation of this source of information, specifically for arena players, is that it does not provide information about historic, since historic is not an available format in MTGO. This is actually what I believe is a critical issue with the historic format. It does not have a steady source of data from events with non-zero stakes that is participated in by people who are financially invested in their efforts. Right, so we do have a lot of historic tournaments, but not a lot of historic tournaments that have entrance fees and are participated in by people 24/7. Unlike in Standard, where we still have that in Magic Online, as well as other formats. All right, the next source of data that we're going to go over is quite similar. Both of these are released by Wizards of the Coast. This one is the 6+ win lists in Magic the Gathering Arena. So periodically, Wizards also releases the list of decks that did well on the ladder. Particularly, as you can see here, these are decks that won 6 or more matches in a row in ranked play by players who are from Platinum to Mythic ranking. All right, so you can see these lists here that are posted. So this was posted last July 12th. Okay, so you can also see some of the typical lists, such as this, a mono red, but also some lists that are not as typical. For example, here we have an enchantment deck, an enigmatic incarnation deck. And we also have, so this one is a spells, I mean, a spells deck, essentially, right? So you have Stormwing Entity, Sprite Dragon. It's Izet Phoenix, but without the Phoenix. Right. So what are the pros and cons of this list? Well, actually, in my opinion, this is the weakest possible source of information for you to use. The only pro of this source of information is that it is taken from Magic the Gathering Arena, which means that if you play Magic the Gathering Arena, then this is taken from the same meta where you play in. That said, a major issue is that this list really doesn't tell you much. I mean, firstly, the list is not aggregated. You can see a bunch of lists here, right? A bunch of lists, but it doesn't tell you which list has more representation than the other list. But that's similar to the list from Magic the Gathering Online, right? Both of those are not aggregated. But at the same time, we talked about the lists that are posted for Magic Online being from events where people actually pay an entrance fee to compete every time they do so. And they do so, and these events are open 24/7, right? So that's a big difference because you can have greater confidence in Magic the Gathering Online lists being good by virtue of them being events where everyone is trying their best to win, and every win having a reward, every loss having a consequence. In contrast, these 6+ consecutive win lists on the ladder are much less valuable. No one wins anything from going 6+ consecutive wins. You don't really win anything from doing that. That just happens. Um, at the same time, no one loses anything from conceding a match, right? So you don't try your hardest to win a match. If you're losing, oftentimes if you're on the ladder, you're losing. You just concede, right? And that adds to the list that eventually go 6 wins and more. Right, so that information can still be useful. So this information can still be useful when you view it in its entirety. That is when you combine them and see which decks actually have more representation than other decks. But it would be folly to trust a random deck in this list and expect it to perform well. Like if you see a list here and you see, oh, I'm only 5 wild cards short of making this list. Well, you may spend those 5 wild cards and then you may be utterly disappointed when you see that it's actually a bad deck, because many of these lists are probably bad decks. All right, so this next source of information is aggregated lists from third-party providers. So a number of websites, such as this one, MTG Goldfish, take information released by Wizards. So the one that you saw previously, both the one from Magic Online and from Magic Arena. So they crawl those sites and they gather that information, and then they aggregate them. So they aggregate them to provide statistics for their consumers, as you can see here. So I use MTG Goldfish as an example because this is what I mainly use. But there are also others that you can look for. I really like this one because you can see the percent of the meta share, right? So, and you can see how many decks those actually are. So both of these are important because sometimes we can see that there are only very few decks. So you can see here as well as when you click on one of these. For example, if I click on mono green mid-range here, it will take me to one of the lists. So for example, this one is a list that finished 4-1 in the last standard challenge, and you can see the actual list here. And below you can see breakdowns of the list, right? So you can see, for example, among those 24 decks, 98% of them have 4 Lovestruck Beast in the main, right? So you can see that, and you can see how important each of the cards are. You can see that Swarm Shambler is basically the one drop of choice now. And at the same time, actually, you can look for, so this tab on the right, you can see, so this is from the standard league. So this is exactly the same as the decks that appear in this website that we saw earlier, but this time it is better aggregate. I mean, it's better summarized here. You can click this, and instead of having to scroll down all of these, you can actually see the decks, right? You can see the decks, what they are, and you can click on any of them if you want to look into them further. You can also look into the players who piloted these into their top finishes. So you can, if you click on the player's name, sample, so you can see how many times they were able to do well. So this particular pilot has been able to do very well. Uh, as you can see here, those are their achievements across all of these tournaments. There are also articles that aggregate the data from the same tournaments and provide further insight into them. So this is what I usually consume, what I usually go over. Articles by Yeoman5 in TCG Player, standard metagame breakdowns essentially. So this one is for July 15. And this is a very good resource in my opinion. So you can see standard winners metagame. So you can see the different decks, how many of the decks were included, and the percentage of them in relation to the rest of the metagame, and as well as commentary, very useful commentary on which are the decks to beat, which are the decks that the author believes people will play but shouldn't, as well as which decks people should respect but won't. So these are very good insights in my opinion, so you should check this out. So the main advantage of these lists, both these aggregated lists, both in this form and in article form, is that they provide a wide snapshot of the meta. So these are especially good for spotting obvious choices of good decks. Right? That is when a deck is broken, when you have a very good deck that is basically what you should bring to any tournament. It can be fairly obvious when you look at the meta percent share. So sometimes here, one deck will stand out over the rest, and you can see that the percent share of that deck would be 30%, 20%, something very high relative to the rest. And so that means that that deck is really overperforming, and that's a good indication that choosing that deck is the best choice you can possibly make for a particular event. On the other hand, so the biggest issue of using this source of information is that while they are good for spotting obvious winners, they are not as good for identifying non-obvious ones. That is, when these percentages are close to each other, as they are right now, as you can see right now, even though monogreen midrange has the highest percentage, it doesn't mean that monogreen midrange is actually the best, because several other things factor into that, right? Player quality, event quality, all of those factor into those choices, as well as the interaction of these decks with each other also factor into those choices. So when these numbers are close to each other, it's difficult to tell which one of these you should be using. So just by looking at the numbers. At the same time, though, it's still useful because even though it doesn't tell you which is the best deck, it at least tells you which are good decks, as well as which are bad decks, right? So right now, I would say that I would like to play Winota, but it's not showing up in these lists. So that if I needed to craft something to play Winota, I would probably not do so because the data does not really support doing that. Another issue is that sources of aggregated data, such as this, may vary wildly in terms of event quality. So here you can see the meta share of each of these decks in terms of the winning meta share of each of these decks, but you don't really see where these are coming from. So where these are coming from, where these decks are coming from, can actually be seen here on the sidebar from MTG Goldfish. So you can see that these decks come from this tournament, and these are from a standard league, and this is from another tournament. But you don't really know what the quality of each of these events are, unless you look into them and you view their actual nature. Do they offer prizes? Are they free to join? So those are important considerations when determining how valuable the information are in this list. Of course, as we get more events, that becomes less and less important, because there would be a greater tendency for important events to just drown out the not so important events, which are fewer and typically have fewer participants and so on. But still, it's an issue that you should be aware of, and that should inform your decision when you make a choice among all of these decks. So last but certainly not least, we go to this source of information, which is tracker data. So this is the data from third-party apps. So we know that there are third-party apps such as MTG Assistant, which you install in order for you to be able to track your games on MTG Arena. But these same apps also collect your data, collect the data from their users, and then aggregate them in order to be able to estimate things such as win rates. And this data can be drawn from hundreds, if not, or sometimes even thousands of matches. In some apps, it's even possible for you to filter the data. For example, you can only show results of matches played in best of three, as you can see here. So these are only the traditional standard top metagame decks for traditional standard, so it's best of three. And some apps allow you to narrow it down even further. For example, just limit it to games that are played in Mythic. So what are the pros of this? Just like the 6+ win lists that are released by Wizards, one of the best aspects of this resource is that it lives in the same place as we do if we mainly play Magic the Gathering Arena. That is, this is the same meta that you face on the ladder because the data is collected from the ladder. However, so we did say that those lists are not very useful, right? The one that comes from WotC. So what makes a difference is that the size of the data from which these estimates are made is much larger. So unlike the lists that are released by Wizards, the data from trackers incorporate both how well these lists did, as well as how many people actually use these lists. And you can see that based on how many matches uh, data, these estimates are collected from. So for example, here we have Mono Red Aggro having a 59% average win rate based on 579 matches. So knowing that this comes from 579 matches informs us well about the quality of this estimate. Right. But at the same time, so here you can see that Mono Red Aggro, Gruul Aggro, Sulta Yorion, they're all close to each other. They also have a similar number of matches, but Sulta Yorion has considerably more than the other two. So that also informs you that these differences in win rate may not be that important, because like if a lot more people use Sultayorion, that also means that there might be a lot more people who are not really that adept at using Sultayorion who are using Sultayorion. Therefore, they're losing more matches than the other people who may be winning a lot more matches. So that factors into your consideration on which one to use. But at the same time, and we talked about this before, this at least gives you an idea of what are the decks that are performing well and what are the decks that are not performing well. So meaning at least this gives you a broad view of what are the possible choices that you can have, and it lets you avoid choices that are decidedly bad. So we've come to the end of the video, and like I said, we will be giving away some more codes. In order to be eligible for this giveaway, you have to be a subscriber, so please subscribe, like this video, and answer the following question in the comment section. The question is, what do you do when you are preparing to join a big tournament? Any tournament, like an FNM to a big tournament. How do you choose your deck? What factors into your decision? Do you use any of these resources that I mentioned in this video? So I'd like to know more about that from your perspective. So please share in the comment section. And one person will win a 1000 gem code, while 3 others will win an ICR code. So we will give that away in 5 days. In 5 days, we will pick the winners for those items. And so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and I'll see you again next time. And may the shuffler be with you always.